This is the F1 Fantasy Cockpit, brought to you by the Fantasy Sports Advice Network. Join the community today at fantasysportsadvicenetwork.com or get the app for all your fantasy sports needs.
What is going on, guys? It is the captain here from the Fantasy Sports Advice Network with our very first episode of Formula One Fantasy. I've played for a couple years now, and I'm very excited to be bringing this to you guys on behalf of the network. So, it just launched a couple days ago this week, so a little better late than never. We're very excited to have it. So this is going to be for people that have played before as well as new people. We want to get you all covered so everyone's having fun and getting real competitive because fantasy is life. So when you first come into the F1 Fantasy Formula page, on the right here, you're going to see a manage your team. It might say pick your team if it's the first time coming into there. So right off the hop, it's going to take you into here. Go to my team. It's going to ask you, it won't show you 3 right away. It's going to show you 1. There'll be 5 dots with little plus signs in them. The idea of this is you're going to create a team of 5 drivers and 2 constructors. You have 100 million to spend, so there's a salary cap, and it's going to fluctuate through the season. So we'll move on to that. But that's the gist of that. There's specific rules on things you get points for. Scoring, like any fantasy league, is the most important thing. So coming down here into the how to play, you can create up to 3 teams. I will be doing that with you guys. If you want to join my league, I will show you the code for that a little further on. So I'm going to have one with 3 different strategies just so you can see how maybe your strategy, whether there is one or not. I know I'm that way with my own personal team, but I want to try and see if there's 3 hard strategies that can prove to be better or worse, because if it doesn't have as many changes next year, we're going to be able to start off a lot better. So one of your drivers each week after you make your team is going to have a 2 times DRX boost. So the idea of that is one of your team drivers is going to double their score for the week, whether it's positive or whether it's negative. So you want to be using this on your best driver, or the person who you think is going to score the most points given any certain situation in the week. But more often than not, you're putting on your best driver. There's 6 different chips you can use throughout the season. You can only use them once each. So we'll go into the FAQs page just to quickly talk about each of those. You can change your team throughout the season. You get 2 transfers per week. So with those transfers, they are free. And so you can switch any 2 drivers out as long as you stay within the cap. Even after your budget moves, everyone's going to fluctuate. Maybe you want to get a cheaper driver to get a more expensive constructor. There's a lot of ways you can work with it inside the season. So with these transfers, the other cool thing that works is if you only use 1 transfer this week past qualifying, or sorry, up to qualifying, so into the second race there. If you only use 1 transfer, that second transfer of yours is actually going to carry on to the next race. So you will have 3 transfers to use in that race, which is really, really helpful. Now, if in that second week you have your 3 transfers and you only use 2 of them, I'm pretty confident, unless it's changed, that you will still only have 2 the following week because only the extra one of your 2 carries over. I don't know if that third one carries over in perpetuity because I haven't actually kept it that long. I've only ever seen it for 1 week before I eventually end up burning it and having 2. There's lots of leagues. There's global leagues. There's going to be some that ESPN, including myself, have put on for you guys to join us. So be sure to see those. So going into the game rules, so your transfer limit, I said you get 2 every week. You can go over that. The game will let you do that. So be aware. If you use a 3rd transfer without having the ability to use it with an extra one that you may have carried over, it's going to be minus 10 points. There are going to be weeks this is worth it. Last year, McLaren went on a tear halfway through the season, and by the 3rd race, everyone was picking them up, and it became so hard to triple stack the McLarens. For anyone that did it after the 1st or 2nd race that they started winning, you were really lucky. And I actually did this with one of my teams where I took the minus 10 on that second week because I could only just afford them, and if they continued, I knew I wouldn't be able to get that team with the 3 stack later on. There are times it's well worth to take the 10, but for the most part, don't try to use it every week. It's just going to be detrimental. It should be a one-off after certain things like your wild cards are used. This is new for this year, so for everyone, whether you're returning or new, pit stop points. So not in the sprint races, just the regular races. Every single constructor team is eligible for points. And where it gets important is there's a tier system for how fast their quickest stop of the race is. So it's not cumulative. It doesn't add with all their pit stops through the race. So more pit stops means more points. It's a single pit stop. They take the best one. And based on how quick that is, it is anywhere, I believe, from 2 to 20 points, as well as additional points if they have the fastest pit stop of the day, as well as a world record pit stop. So we'll get more into that as it describes to the bottom to be more specific. And then DQ penalties, this is new. So there was a few disqualifications last year. A lot of times it's due to the car or the car setup or certain things with the teams have taken that away from the drivers themselves. This is not something that we can really see affect us. I know last year some people, because once they did disqualified after qualifying, it was too late for us anyway, and we were just seeing huge penalties for them not having races qualified, which we'll talk about more in the bottom. But basically, this is just helping us out to get a lot more. There'll be less negative points for our drivers. It'll only count towards the constructors. This is more just a notice to us. It's nothing really that we can have affect us, or unless of course you have a late change chip. So points, getting into the points for driving. So from pole position all the way down to 10th place, as those are the point scoring positions, you will get 10 to 1 point moving down. Pretty straightforward. If they score between 11th and 20th, they just get no points. It's not negative. It's not anything else. It's just 0 points for finishing there. If they don't set a time at all, maybe they crashed in practice 3 or any of the earlier practices, or something's wrong with the driver, they get no time set, it's going to be minus 5 points. Should there be a reason that they're disqualified, also minus 5 points. And so a lot of it comes into Q1 here. Drivers who do not set a Q1 time will be given a 5-point penalty. This includes inactive drivers. So if you have a driver that gets changed out partway through the season, for example, there was things like Ricardo last year, or Sainz got his appendix out, so then Ollie Behrman came in. You have to make that change yourself. It's not going to do it automatically for you like it did a few years ago. You have to change it yourself, otherwise you're getting an inactive penalty as well as a does not qualify penalty for your driver. For the constructors in qualifying, it all works on how if one or both of the drivers reaches Q2 or Q3. So if you have a weaker kind of team, a lot like the Kick Sauber teams that are sometimes almost always being eliminated, like they were for most of last year, but not completely all of last year, that's a minus 1 point. And then as you can see, for one or both drivers moving up, we're going to see an increase of points. And then should both drivers reach Q3 is 10 points. So keep in mind, if both drivers reach Q2, that's 3. And if both drivers reach Q3 is 10. That's already a 7-point difference per constructor at that rate. So keep that in mind when you go building your teams. Now there's sprint races every year. So same as a regular race, positions gained is a point, positions lost is minus a point. Fastest lap is still 5 points, which is kind of odd because it's only 1 point during the race, but that's neither here nor there. Anything to make points, to make fantasy more fun, I'm all for it. Slightly less in the sprint race, as only the top 8 positions score points. Same negatives as before. Same goes with the race, except fastest lap is now 10 points, and there's also the driver of the day, as always, 10 points as well. And then similar to points scored towards the Drivers' Championship, 1 through 10, 25 all the way down to 1, and 11th and 20th get no points at all. And then these are the DNF and DQs that give you negative points. The new thing here, as you can see in the times, is pit stop times. So if you have pit stops over 3 seconds, which is rare, I think, it has to be a race maybe that there's only one pit stop happening for this to probably occur. Because some teams did have really long pit stops last year, but I don't think both were over 3 seconds. That'd just be absolutely unheard of. And then, as you can see, from 2.5 to 3 seconds is 2, 2.2 to 2.4 is 5, 2 seconds to 2.2 is 10, and anything under 2 seconds is 20, with a 5-point bonus awarded to fastest pit stop and 15 points if someone sets a world record, currently at 1.8 by McLaren 2 years ago. With this is really important because not every dominant team dominates at pit stops. I'm going to pull up this website here at f1pace.com. These guys do great work. Donate a coffee to this guy. So here they showed the fastest pit stop last year by each team. So look at Haas right here at 2.5. Going back to this at 2.5, their fastest pit stop through the entire year only would have got them 2 points. So Haas's constructor for every race last year scored no more than 2 points if this was in effect by pit stop times. Now, the other thing to look at, so for the 5 points, I feel like this is where most teams will fall into 2.2 to 2.5. So from 2.2 here to 2.5, that's our Sauber, Aston Martin, and Williams. Now, these guys are likely to fall in there as well, as this is the fastest time. We'll get into averages here in a sec. But looking at this, look at this, these three. So sub 2 seconds, Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari, the big three for the constructors last year, and the big three, what should be again this year, all 1.9. So anyone wanting to go heavy into the constructors, sub 2 seconds is a lot of points. That's 20 points right there compared to 2 for Haas. That's 18. So having the big constructors, just from quickly looking through here, the 7 points from having both in Q2, assuming both get to Q2, or both to Q3, plus another 18 for having a sub 2 second, if possible, point. That's a lot of points over a weekend. That's going to add up. Now, keeping on the same site, here they have the percentage of their pit stops and their time. So realistically, I think the sweet spot we're looking for is sub 2.5. If you can get under 2.5, I think your constructor's happy, and any times under 2.20 is also beneficial. These are going to be rare. They will happen, but I think 5 to 10 points is what we should be aiming for with our constructors. So 2 to 2.5, with 2.2 being the difference. So this graph isn't perfect for the numbers we want, but immediately looking right here, so look at Red Bull of 1.9 to 2.26, almost 40% of their pit stops. That's almost more than double than anyone else on this team. That's not going to change based on how the car's built, likely, unless they're breaking wings and things like that, causing long pit stops. But their fastest pit stop, these guys mean business. Even their sister team had one of the better teams on average, a 2.7 second? I don't know how they're determining that. That seems awfully slow for that. But looking at their times, they're right up here with McLaren, Mercedes, and Ferrari, which is absolutely crazy to think about. So even looking at sub 2.4, so to guarantee, almost guarantee you're under that 2.5 point, over 50% for Red Bull. And then you're looking at close to 40 for Ferrari, and then you're looking at about maybe 25 for RB, and maybe a little sub 25 here for Mercedes, which is really not as good as I thought it was, but they admitted to doing a lot less work with their pit crews, letting equipment get dated, maybe the practices get dated, and they've admitted to that. And then there's other teams here, McLaren right up here, that's about 35 to 40% there. And then we have another 25% here, even with Alpine. After that, it's a pretty egregious drop-off for Williams, Haas, Sauber, and Aston Martin, teams where the pit crews really are struggling to get under that 2.6. So for these four constructors, if you're thinking of that, it's worth keeping in mind that you're losing some good pit stop points, because other than these four, 2.5 seems pretty well quite achievable. Mercedes is making it look hard, but they kind of make up for it here in this 2.4 to 2.5 range, and that's getting them close to 50%. So for all these teams here to go 2.52 or less, they're all, these like 6 teams here are all pretty close to giving you that, with obviously Ferrari, Red Bull being the more dominant ones. But as a budget team, RB's right there. They were not good at the start of last year. People are going to comment, but they got it figured out, and they've learned from their sister team. Whether they were trading Jackman, I don't know, but it was very important, I think, to see that. So I think this is going to be a big part of this year. Constructors have been very favored to be used heavily in teams as the priority in past years. I know I've used that to win my leagues as well, and I think it's going to continue. So we'll see what happens there. We're going to go to the FAQs now just to read about all the different chips here. So when we go to, I believe it's scores or more. Goodness me, picking a team. Where are the chips? Here we go. So there's something called an autopilot chip. So when you go into your team, that's the code you'll need eventually. Down here, you'll see apply chips. And there's these 6 chips that you can apply to put on any of your teams. And so the first one's the autopilot chip. So if you apply this one, it will automatically put the 2 times boost that you put on your best driver to whoever your best driver finishes on the day. Because anything could happen. Your best driver could crash out. He could have a horrible pit stop. Anything can happen. He may get you almost negative points, and you don't want that. So the autopilot chip, which you can use once, will go to the highest scoring driver of the day for your team. So it guarantees you to use that 2 times very efficiently. Then you have the extra DRS boost chip. So this is one you want to put on your best driver. It gives them a 3 times multiplier on their score for the next Grand Prix, and then you can move the 2 times to another driver. Now, the caveat of that is you have to put the 2 times back on your favorite driver for the next week. Last year I did this and I didn't realize that it wasn't going to reset to my original team and move the 2 times back because that 2 times was a conscious move to put there as if I was transferring someone in or out. So it's important to know that. The no negative chip, a chip I used on the first race last year just because who knows what's going to happen. We have no idea what these middle of the pack teams are. For anyone wanting to take a risk on a lesser team or a certain rookie with 6 rookie drivers this year on a wet, rainy race possibly this weekend, the no negative chip I imagine will get used a lot. And the idea is exactly as it looks. It's a no negative chip. So if anyone on your team scores negative, they limit the score to 0. So if they were to score even negative 5 points on the day, it goes to 0. If it's your best driver who crashes out and gets a DNF, and he's supposed to get like a minus 30, it's still only going to be 0. So that's what the no negative chip does. The wildcard chip allows you to completely disregard the transfer limit throughout the week on your team. So for the entire week, you can make as many changes to your team, completely overhaul it. I know a lot of people that if you don't guess right on which of the middle of the pack teams are really good this week, and maybe you don't get the top driver perfect, like maybe I pick Verstappen and Norris ends up dominating this weekend, and I want to change over to Norris as well as change over my middle pack teams I guessed wrong on. The wildcard chip might be my way to do that quickly, and it might work out, it might not, because it could be a flash in the pan weekend. It's going to be chaotic, it's going to be rainy. None of the conditions are going to line up through practice, quali, and then the race. So I will suggest not to go too crazy after the race this weekend, but we'll see what happens. We'll get there. The limitless chip. So the limitless chip is basically the wild card on steroids. The idea of this is there is no longer a cost limit on your team. You can transfer in all the best drivers, all the best constructors on any race weekend. You still get to use your 2 times, and that chip you can just use once. And once it's done, your team will reset to what you had the previous week. So your prices will still be affected, but you don't get credit for any of the new drivers you bring in. But you can completely overhaul your team on a limitless chip and get all these points. I know a lot of people, myself included, like to use this during sprint races last year because there's extra points to be had on a sprint weekend. And then the final one here is the final fix chip. Now this one is really nerve-wracking the first time you use it because you can't use it until the end of qualifying. So the idea of this one is if there is someone that maybe qualifying is going to be tough conditions, and maybe some of these rookies are looking really fast, but maybe one of them spins out really bad and crashes the car in qualifying. You know it's going to be wet, and you have a bunch of rookies. Put the final fix chip in there. And then if one of them were to crash or something happened, anything could happen. Maybe they get hurt. Maybe they're not feeling well. Maybe if someone's down with the flu, you're worried about them not being able to continue the race weekend. This final fix allows you to make a free transfer for another driver into your lineup. It's really concerning to use because you can't really see it being used till after qualifying, but then it shows up and you can use it It's really concerning when you can't use it. It feels like you've wasted it, but I mean, that's what it's there for. It's a final fix if you need it. So for the most part, that is how the teams are built. That's how the scoring works. We briefly talked about the changes for all the new people here. So in the past, when building these teams, a lot of people, myself included, would go, and please pardon the order of all these drivers. I know it's bothering me that I don't have the number one driver with my 2 times in the top left, but I've been playing around with it a lot. I really like the price changes they've made for this year. It is incredibly frustrating and challenging, but I think it's going to create a wider range of team compositions for people in leagues. Because the last couple of years, there's been a lot of similar teams. There's only been maybe like 2 or 3 setups that were successful. I really think this is going to open that up for a lot of leagues, which is really exciting. So in the past, a constructor focused team was really strong just because there was so many extra points. So the idea is that the constructors, so McLaren, I'm getting all the points that Norris and Piastri are going to score this weekend, and I'm getting all the points that Antonelli and Russell are scoring this weekend. So I have them covered. And then the idea, once I have two of the best constructors, I know they're going to be my workhorses. They're going to score me points. With that, if you lean really heavy to one side, you'll have to likely suffer with at least 4 of the lowest scoring drivers. That's just the reality of it. Now, that's not necessarily the worst thing. There are ways for these guys to score points. Because if you start at the back, you're not getting overtaken, you're not getting passed. If people crash out, you're only moving up points. It may not count as an overtake for points, but it's going to count as a position gained. Even if Berman or Bortoleto here is only scoring like 1 or 2 points for me every week and not costing me negatives, I'm happy because that's all I need them to do. So leaning heavy, you do want one stud. So by going McLaren and Mercedes, and you can switch this up. I just went really heavy in McLaren. It's the most expensive. Why not? Mercedes, I believe, was the cheapest. Why not? And Russell was the best I could afford. Antonelli was the next one, followed by Liam Lawson. I don't really feel good about picking as an anchor of drivers being someone young in a new car, especially in a competitive car where the pressure is high. I'd rather take a guy that Russell kind of think puts a lot of pressure on himself. He's not the most consistent, but he's a guy that can be stable knowing these constructors are going to carry me. These aren't going to be my final teams. I just kind of drew them up as ideas as what teams could be to kind of show off these 3 strategies. So then you can have a driver heavy one. So this isn't as driver heavy per se, but the idea is that I have the best driver. I have the best driver, and I have a way to not just have the 4 worst drivers at the bottom. I was able to sneak Alonso in there. There is a huge gap between the A and B tier drivers. There's like drivers in the 20 millions, and everyone else is like, there's a couple at 13, and then the rest are all like sub 10. So there's a huge gap where trying to make room to move from like a Sainz at 13 million to even like a Lawson at 18. It's a lot of work to make up 5 million on a team budget. So ideally for this team, the other thing I could do, because McLaren is the most expensive, and this is supposed to be driver heavy, the idea is I wanted one constructor to kind of carry me for. I could go Mercedes, and that frees up $8 million right there that I could then get closer to moving an Alonso to even a Antonelli or a Lawson, and then maybe I just bump a Norris down to a Verstappen, if that's even counted a bump down. But in price-wise, that's how that would work. So the idea for this one is that I'm getting the idea of Norris for week 1 is that we know what the McLaren car is. We know what Norris is. He is a very safe bet. He should be a podium finisher. He very much should be. We know exactly what his car is. We know what he is. There wasn't much changing in the team. Week 1, safe is nice for some. And then Alonso is an absolute like veteran. He's done tons of racing, so wet conditions in a sub car in Australia, he's done it likely multiple times. It's not going to be an issue for him. And then the 3 lowest cost other drivers at the bottom, and then someone like Williams. Williams being a middle of the pack. Actually, the very middle, I think. They're the only one that's not less than $8 million, I think, or over 20 million. So I have a lot of high hopes for Williams this year. I really want them to do well. And actually, with my budget builder set up, because prices change on a week to week, the goal is to eventually be able to move just enough people each week that right now the sum of this team plus my leftovers is 100 million. The idea is that you can get the team up to by the end of season like 120 million. And of course, like the mark for being able to afford, oh man, like if I had 20 million, I could have like a whole Norris plus this team. The marker is moving because he's going to go up in price, same with everyone else. But there is going to be some fluctuation there where if Williams is going up so much in price and maybe Mercedes isn't, all that money I gained from there, I could then flip to maybe either a more reliable constructor or one that's maybe scoring similarly, even if they weren't supposed to. And same with the two drivers being at 13 and 12. They're the highest drivers you can have prior to any of the Red Bull or Mercedes drivers. And I expect them to do well. If they start taking off, and they're the ones that are going to go up the most money throughout the season. They have the highest ceiling to move with Williams. And so the idea of the budget builder is you suffer at the start of the year because you're trying to build up your team value quickly. And then by at least half season, you could be a whole driver ahead. And that's what happened with a lot of teams last year is everyone did so well just casually building their teams because for a lot of people that stacked either Red Bull and Ferrari, or I was triple stacking Ferrari for the longest time before I flipped to McLaren, they gained so much money that I was able to then triple stack McLaren when they were peaking. And that is the goal for what you want. You want to be able to try to get as many of the good drivers, constructors as possible as the value of your team is moving. And so the idea with this budget builder team, which I'm really curious to see how it's good to go, I'm actually thinking I'm going to use this on some of the global leagues just to see how it compares to complete thousands of strangers. I just am really curious to see how it goes, knowing that I'm probably going to suffer the first few weeks with this. But I do have Piastri as my anchor and Red Bull Racing as an anchor. But knowing these three are going to be the biggest movers for me in hopes that they won't be, maybe they will. Maybe they will. If Williams becomes part of the Constructor Championship, they don't leave my team, and that's just what it is. Or I just need them to get close. Maybe even just be like, maybe they're pushing for fifth best constructor, seventh, like best constructor, just something better where these guys go up in value and I can then flip them because I almost don't want to see them on my team at the end of the year for this strategy to be most effective. So that's kind of how the basic strategies work for these three. People are going to make hybrids of this. I think a lot of teams are going to look similar to this, where people are either going to have two really strong constructors, or they're going to get two prolific drivers. Maybe Alonso's being, I think he's undervalued at 8.8 million, but maybe even they find a way to add maybe signs in here by cutting down Williams even further to like an RB, knowing that they're going to get those pit crew points, or maybe an Alpine, knowing that they're actually going to get Alpine points and maybe be a bit more competitive than the RB team will. So there's all those things to consider. There's so many questions still with all these rookies, how everything's going to come together. So definitely build your teams, have a look. I have built like dozens of teams and they all look completely different almost, which I'm very excited for, but it's also very frustrating. How do you choose one? But I'll be back with you guys after FP2 because FP1 and 2 are going to be really telling, I think, for how these cars compare to each other. It's going to be cold for FP1 and 2. And FP2 usually, for the new people, is the one that's most telling towards the race. So that is the one that normally we're looking at to see how competitive the cars are. They're kind of in race form then. The conditions are similar to that of the race time. FP3 and quali are supposed to be pretty hot. So we'll see what that means for that. And then it's supposed to be raining, I believe, during, or did I get that backwards? Yeah, rain for the race and pretty cool. So we'll see how that goes. Mercedes are historically strong when it's cool. But also there's a lot of veterans in this field, especially like Hamilton and Leclerc that seem to do well in the wet. Same with Verstappen, same with Sainz, same with Ocon. So there's certain drivers that do better in the wet. So I'm really curious to see what shakes out this weekend. But yeah, so for anyone that wants to join my league here, I'm just going to go to my pin leagues here. Here's the Fantasy Sports Advice Network. If you want to join this league to compete with me, here's the code. I will leave that here. It'll also be in the description below. The idea for this is for you to join me, see how you compare with your teams, and you can actually see what all three of my teams are doing throughout the season relative to yours. You can see how and when I use my chips. I'm likely going to tell you anyway, but you can see what I'm actually doing from here in the screen anyway. I'm going to see you guys after FP2. We'll be back. Have some fun. We'll see you soon. Have a good night.